I've been asked since its release to make some kind of a statement about the new shitty Blu-ray version of Star Wars, but I've decided to go about this a different way. I don't think I can say anything about the dumb and unnecessary new changes that were made to the original films that someone else hasn't already said, and I'm also sure that Red Letter Media will be making a great video about it soon. So instead, I want to talk about why this kind of thing keeps happening with the Star Wars films in the first place, and it all comes down to one issue: an inability on the part of George Lucas to simply listen. What bothers me even more than a bad movie is people who can't take responsibility for the bad movies that they make. The ones who just cannot seem to accept the fact that people don't like these films. Or even something worse than that, someone who knows that people do not like these films or are disappointed with these films, but simply don't care, because they believe they exist in a vacuum and the audience is just along for their ride. The Star Wars prequel films in particular, at least the first two, have been largely written off as bad, and rightly so. But don't tell that to George Lucas, because if you do, that man will reach into his big bag of excuses and give you any number of reasons why the people that think they are bad just don't matter. Before we get into that, however, we need to explore the core of this man's inability to accept responsibility for the reactions that his films get.
But most film critics hated episodes 1 and 2.
Misa back! No again, Jaja. You are in big doo-doo this time.
How worried are you that the critics are not going to like this new movie?
Oh, I'm not worried at all. They haven't liked any of them, really. And they especially haven't liked the last two. So,
well, exactly.
Hey, it can't get any worse.
George, not only is that demonstratively not true, it's just a cop-out. To say that most critics hated the first two prequel films is accurate, but to say that they never liked any of your movies is just plain wrong, and it's a trump card excuse of, well, I've always been victimized. Star Wars was so insanely popular critically and commercially that saying anything negative about the thing was considered unofficial heresy at the time of its release. Harlan Ellison rightly compared bad-mouthing Star Wars in its prime to a felony on the level of burning the American flag. The only reviews or quotes from critics that ever got published in those days were from critics that were willing to say anything good about your movies. The only film critics that ever had the balls to say anything bad about the original films at the height of their popularity were Harlan Ellison and John Simon. The rest of them, by and large, either liked your movies or loved your movies. The reason most critics panned the first two Star Wars prequels is because the first two Star Wars prequels were bad, and that is something that you cannot seem to take responsibility for, ever, under any circumstances, not even just a little. I'm not saying that you should think they're bad, after all, you're the one who made them. What I want is some recognition that your audience doesn't like them and wanted something better. And maybe just a little bit of recognition that some of the complaints that your audience had about these films might just be a little bit valid, even if you disagree with them.
Did you not say ever to yourself, well, maybe they had a point with this or with that? Because you seem to be saying they're just going after you.
Well, they are. They're not, the point is, it's like if you paint your house white, and somebody comes along, well, that should be a greenhouse. Well, fine, but I wanted to paint it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with painting it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with me for painting it white. Maybe it should be a greenhouse. But I didn't want it to be a greenhouse. I wanted it to be a white house.
George, you're talking about these movies like you're the only one who is ever going to watch them. And you're also talking about them as if your opinion on them is the only one that matters. Yes, you decide whether or not your house is green or white or plaid or Jar Jar. That is entirely your business. But when you put that house under the scrutiny of an audience, and if that house is as big a fucking eyesore as the prequel films were, then it's not just your business anymore. You also seem to be conceding here that you gave your audience something that you knew they didn't want, but you made it so anyway because you wanted it to be that way. Why can't you just take responsibility for the fact that, for whatever reason, you made bad movies, or at the very least, you made movies that most people were disappointed with? It's that kind of an attitude that makes it very hard for me to forgive movies that are as bad as the prequel films. But you know what? The opposite is also true. When a filmmaker has enough class, enough humility, and enough listening ears to concede that they may have made a mistake in making one of their films, then I forgive and forget. This is why you will never hear me say a single bad thing about Batman and Robin. Not because it wasn't bad, but because of this.
If there's anybody watching this that, let's say, loved Batman Forever, and went into Batman and Robin with great anticipation, if I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention. My intention was just to entertain them.
Okay, Joel Schumacher, if you're really sorry, then let's let bygones be bygones. I mean, I don't care for the context exactly, as he seems to be apologizing only to fans of Batman Forever, but that may have just been a problem with poor wording. What is being said here is that if anyone was disappointed by Batman and Robin, he's sorry. I mean, when is the last time a filmmaker said something like that about their own work? Can you even imagine the great George Lucas actually apologizing to the millions and millions of fans who were disappointed by the prequel films? You know, instead of just making more bad and unnecessary changes to movies that were fine to begin with? This is why, even though I know it is a bad movie, you will never hear me say a bad thing about Batman and Robin. Joel Schumacher apologized, and I have accepted his apology. And exactly the same goes for one of the worst sequels I have ever seen, Rocky V. And here's why.
Well, let's start with the Rocky movies then, because I love the Rocky movies.
Okay.
They're not all great. There's some great ones in there, okay? You know this to be true. Okay, give me your score out of 10 for each of your Rocky movies.
Okay.
Rocky V.
0.
No, was it that bad, Rocky V?
Yeah, it was bad.
I don't remember it quite as bad as that.
It's just, it was a goose egg. I was definitely not there. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do the last one. Because I said, you know, if you're going to end up on doing something, like, you can't, so it was so bad, so off-key, that was the impetus to do the
And the last one.
Right answer, Stallone. That was absolutely the right answer. Sylvester Stallone made one of the worst sequels to a great franchise that has ever been made by human hands. But what did he do when people criticized the film? He listened. He actually took a step back and asked himself if there was some truth to what they were saying. And instead of just making a bunch more Rocky V's and making a bunch of stupid and unnecessary changes to his previous films that were already great, he made one last film that captured the spirit of the series, and in its own way was just as good as the one that started it all. No one likes to be criticized about their work, but it's not about the criticism. It's about how you take that criticism and learn from it the next time around. The only thing George Lucas ever did right in listening to criticism was with Jar Jar Binks. When he became aware of the backlash towards the character, he diminished him more and more in the other films. And that's all well and good, but it's not enough. I mean, what did he do when he learned that no one liked the prequel films? Did he make better movies? No. How someone responds to criticism reflects on how willing those people are to examine their own work and learn from it. Baz Luhrmann, for example, released a box set of the Red Curtain trilogy, and on that box set is something that I had never seen before. A catalog of all of the reviews of all of his movies, separated into the categories of positive reviews and negative reviews. The man actually included scathing reviews of his own films onto his DVD. Why? Because he wanted people to be aware of all sides of the issue, because the man values criticism as a learning tool, rather than just people who are after him and his work. The Wachowski brothers did this too, by the way. I want you to know this. On their box set, they actually allowed 3 film critics to come in and do a scathing commentary about all 3 of the Matrix films. As many bad things as I've said about those 2 in their films, I give them a lot of credit for that. Not many filmmakers would have the courage and humility to let someone come in and basically trash all of their films on their own DVD. Kudos to them for that. As for George Lucas, he is still a man who sees criticism as nothing more than an attack by people who are out to get him. And that point is possibly best made in the following clip.
Yeah, but come on. I mean, when they go after your writing, your directing, it has to hurt.
Oh, it always hurts.
It has to hurt.
It hurts a great deal. But part of making movies is you get attacked, and sometimes in very personal ways.
George, while a lot of people, including myself, have said some very mean things about you and your work, we're not really trying to hurt you, and we're not just after you. What you don't seem to realize is that you are hurting us by simply not listening to us. Your lousy Blu-ray version of Star Wars is just the latest example. It is clear to all of us that you are going to do what you are going to do, and we, the audience, are to be ignored, even though we are the ones who are watching your movies, and we are the ones who made them the success that they are. Let me be perfectly clear about this. You never want to let your audience dictate to you what kind of movie you make, and I'm not saying that that's what you should do. But you do, at some point, on some level, have to ask yourself if you are making a movie that an audience is even going to want to see. And you certainly need to ask yourself if you are making revisions to the movies that we love that we are going to want you to revise. We did not ask for any of these changes. We didn't want any of these changes. They were not necessary. The movies were fine. But as long as you keep thinking about your movies as being just yours, you will continue to alienate the very people that made Star Wars a household name in the first place. We, the audience. That's really all I have to say about this issue at this point, so leave a comment and let me know what you think.